This is polio, the cruel centuries-old crippler of children. Enlarged 77,000 times, these are actual polio viruses. To the University of Michigan campus in 1955 came hundreds of scientists hoping to hear the words that would signal the end of polio's long and ruthless reign of terror. Inside the meeting hall, room was electric with expectancy. Then the historic announcement: the vaccine works. It is safe, effective, and potent. The tests proved it up to 90% effective in preventing paralytic polio. Someday, said Dr. Salk, a vaccine may completely eradicate the menace of polio.
HeLa cells have been used for decades in medical research to aid in the development of vaccines. Although quite removed from the idea of humanity, it is important to acknowledge that HeLa cells are from an individual, namely Henrietta Lacks. Henrietta died in 1951, but her cell line still exists with ongoing reproduction. Due to its long-lasting nature and high susceptibility to disease, they have become an ideal medium for testing drug therapies. Many diseases have been explored through HeLa cells, including polio, a virus which leads to paralysis. We will be discussing many aspects of the application of these cells in the polio vaccine.
Polio has been around for thousands of years. Ancient Egyptian art of people with withered legs suggests polio had existed even back then. Fast forward about 3,500 years to the 20th century, where polio became a worldwide epidemic. Before developments in sanitation and regulations, infants would be exposed to the disease early in development, and their immune system could battle it. However, once sanitation got better, older toddlers and young children would face the most severe form of the disease since they had no immunities built up to it. As a result, nearly 1,000 kids would become paralyzed from this horrific disease every single day. In 1921, President Franklin D. Roosevelt contracted polio at 39 years old and became crippled from the waist down. FDR would then call for a national fight to end polio.
Scientist Jonas Salk was at the forefront of polio vaccine research. Salk studied at the University and Bellevue Hospital Medical College, where he worked on an improved technique to separate bacteria from their culture broth. He went on to work at Pittsburgh's Municipal Hospital, where he conducted most of his polio research and encountered many patients. During the process of developing his vaccine, he wanted to go against the standard live vaccines since they could cause the disease. For each kind of polio, Salk took the virus strains that had the highest number of antibodies and inactivated the virus so it would not run the same risk of causing the disease. Salk had to test his virus, so he turned to doing trials on disabled children. He chose the D.T. Watson Home for crippled children as it was outside the city, far from the public. As these children already had polio, he could test their antibody levels and other side effects without worrying about health risks. He would inject them with the vaccine of the kind of polio that the child had and measured antibody levels. Once this was successful, Salk moved on to trials with children who never had polio but were still crippled. He repeated the same injection process but checked for the contraction of polio. Salk was successful again and went on to test his vaccine on an even bigger sample of children.
As polio began to spread and affect the lives of hundreds of children, scientists clearly saw the need to contain the spread of this virus. This started the research behind the polio vaccine. To start to eradicate this virus, all began with Dr. Karl Landsteiner and Erwin Popper. These two men began the search for polio vaccine by injecting extracts from the spinal cord of a young boy who had just passed into a monkey. Through this, they were able to see how the virus spread. This also was how they determined the virus had 3 strains that all had to be targeted. From here, the virus went on to be injected into smaller animals like rats, mice, rabbits, and guinea pigs. By this point, not only were Landsteiner and Popper the only 2 men involved in this research. Word had spread of the use of animals, especially monkeys, and many more scientists had begun injecting hundreds of other animals. In 1956, Albert Sabin reported approximately 9,000 monkeys, 150 chimpanzees, and 133 human volunteers have been used thus far in the quantitative studies of various characteristics of different strains of poliovirus. These studies were necessary to solve many more problems before an oral vaccine could become a reality. The study for a vaccine had grown to be so large that even humans were being experimented on in order to test the effects of the virus and possible vaccines.
Following the use of monkeys and children to test the polio vaccine, Salk and the NFIP were on the hunt for a cheaper and faster method. The NFIP was donating thousands of dollars to scientists in an effort to quickly find the right cells, which is where George Guy's key role in the polio story begins. Shortly after hearing about Salk's need for a cell line to test the polio vaccine, Guy discovered the rapid growth abilities of the HeLa cell line. When Salk found out about the specific cell line, he immediately requested a sample from Guy to test the cell line's susceptibility to the poliovirus. Lucky for Salk, the HeLa cell was even more susceptible to the virus than a typical human cell. It would be the perfect host for testing the vaccine. Plus, its quickly multiplying nature would make the process fast and cheap. A massive amount of HeLa cells would need to be cultured for this project, leading the NFIP to appoint the Tuskegee Institute to become the first HeLa cell factory. The institute was given a small sample from George Guy's original cell line, and there they began the industrial growth of trillions of HeLa cells. The outcome of this large-scale experiment was that the scientists were able to prove that Salk's vaccine was effective, and this led to the eventual mass inoculation of children around the globe.
Ethical issues surrounding the HeLa cells have existed since the conception of the cell line. From the beginning, the lack of informed consent by doctors at Johns Hopkins Hospital, where cells were taken from Henrietta Lacks, were improper means to obtain them. Following that, several medical discoveries and innovations made were not accredited to the Lackses, who continued to live with their lower economic status and quality of life, in contrast to the doctors who profited from them. Despite the large impact on the scientific community, as well as the accreditation and commercialization by doctors, this progress was unbeknownst to the Lackses. This is relevant in many cases, one example of which is the Tuskegee Cell Factory, created to produce HeLa cells in bulk to enable Dr. Salk to conduct large-scale studies using them. This emphasized the number of incidences HeLa cells were used for profit without acknowledging that Henrietta Lacks and her family remotely were used for all the progress made. There were also some ethical issues surrounding Salk's trials on disabled children. Much like the lack of informed consent with Henrietta Lacks, the mentally disabled children were not capable of giving consent. Many did not have parents who could advocate for them, so Salk was able to take advantage of them easily. Furthermore, Salk intentionally chose hospitals that were isolated from the city, so they were away from the media. As a result, few would have learned about the harmful conditions these children were subjected to.
An ethical problem is clearly seen with the use of so many animals and people in this study. Hundreds of animals' lives were lost or disabled due to this vaccine development. As well, hundreds of humans are being used as test subjects on a vaccine not yet proven effective or safe. However, as HeLa cells were introduced into the development of this vaccine, the testing on lives came to a stop. Scientists were able to quickly see how HeLa cells were susceptible to a disease and in fact able to use these cells in order to study the virus and create a vaccine. Although there was still a major ethical issue on the way that these cells were first obtained, in this case they served in order to abolish another experimentation that had the same or higher ethical wrongdoing within it.
It can be seen that the advancements made were only possible through unethical means for a supposed greater good. The purpose being to be able to find the means to eradicate polio as a disease, and for the gain of the doctors involved. In modern times, we may see unethical research conducted as a culture shock due to a contrast in context in which informed consent is more prominent in today's world. Since then, informed consent is even more prominent in the sciences and in medical fields, with clear ethical guidelines. Thank you.